On Wednesday morning, a gunman opened fire at an ICE field office in Dallas, killing one detainee and wounding two others. Authorities say the gunman died of a self-inflicted wound. No ICE officers were injured. Although the investigation is still in its early stages, federal officials quickly described the shooting as an act of targeted violence and an attack against U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. FBI Director Kash Patel later posted a photo on social media showing an unspent shell casing engraved with the words anti-ICE. U.S. Senator Ted Cruz was at a press conference in Dallas and had this to say.
It was 2 weeks ago today that we saw a political assassination in Utah that tore the heart out of much of this country. This is the third shooting in Texas directed at ICE or CBP. This must stop. To every politician who is using rhetoric demonizing ICE and demonizing CBP, stop. The divisive rhetoric tragically has real consequences.
U.S. Senator Ted Cruz of Texas on Wednesday. This latest shooting, of course, raises troubling questions about safety for both immigration and customs enforcement officers and for immigrants themselves. Whether intended or not, people being detained by ICE were the direct victims of this attack. Cesar Espinosa is the executive director of the immigrant and civil rights organization FIEL Houston. He's on the phone with us now. Cesar, good morning.
Thank you for having us.
We learned very quickly after this latest shooting took place Wednesday that the victims were all immigrant detainees. What was your initial reaction to that realization?
Well, I mean, the initial reaction is shock. We don't expect these things to happen. I mean, anytime there's a mass shooting, I think there's still a sense of shock, even though they're very, very common. But to find that this was somehow related to ICE or immigrants obviously adds a different factor to it. And at this point, for us at least, there's still more questions than there are answers.
We just heard Senator Cruz expressing concern about attacks on immigration and customs enforcement officers who he says are just doing their jobs. Do you challenge that notion?
I mean, absolutely. This is once again, I find it very interesting that he's saying, for politicians to stop the rhetoric, yet he is pushing a narrative that's a very dangerous narrative, regardless of the fact. I mean, and at the end of the day, he makes statements when it's appropriate for him or when it's convenient for him. But yet when there's school shootings targeted at innocent kids, he often remains silent.
We saw after the Charlie Kirk shooting, we're seeing after this ICE field office shooting, the blame game is getting ramped up. Blame on the administration for its immigration policies, blame on immigrant rights organizations like yours for challenging those policies, blame on mainstream media, on social media for ginning up the debate, and so on. What's not getting discussed while all this blame is being thrown around?
I think what's not being discussed is the fact that, political discourse is a fundamental part of the United States. Now, when it is dangerous, when it turns dangerous, is when politicians on both sides of the aisle use it to vilify or to push their own narrative and become intolerant. And I think the other fact that is not being discussed is the fact that at the end of the day, one immigrant was killed. Several immigrants were injured yesterday, and yet the focus remains on doubling down on raids or doubling down on detentions and more anti-immigrant action.
Is there a way for us to more effectively separate out the political rhetoric, policy decisions that you may or may not agree with, or even the ways in which people are apprehended and held and in some cases deported, all of which, of course, has understandably sparked impassioned debate? A way to separate that and the profound real-life consequences that it's having on a lot of people from the acts of violence that we're seeing, including Wednesday's shooting?
I mean, I think number one is politicians everywhere and people need to not jump to the gun real quick. A lot of people were yesterday, minutes after the shooting, they were condemning and bringing up conjectures that even before allowing police or investigators to get there. And I think that's very dangerous because we're just people in general society is just pushing this narrative without really knowing what's going on. And second of all, I think this merits the fact that there are more detentions. We don't know why these people were detained to begin with. And so at the end of the day, we should be talking about a solution rather than vilifying and in essence, hunting the immigrant community and blaming everything on them. Like I said yesterday, the victims were immigrants, yet we're not talking about it. Most politicians are just talking about the anti-ICE rhetoric.
Well, let's bring this back to Houston and the immigrant community here. What impact does all of this have? And I mean the politics, the policy, and yes, even the violence, all of it. What's it having on not just those who have entered the country illegally, but also those who are here legally? What kind of atmosphere are they living in today?
For the first time, we've heard a lot of people who are, even naturalized citizens saying that they don't feel welcomed in parts. I know in Houston or in the United States, I know several people who are deciding to, who are U.S. citizens who are saying that they may feel more comfortable retiring in somewhere else than the USA, and then that's sad because at the end of the day, the United States is their home. In general, people are apprehensive. They're still afraid to go to work. They're afraid to participate fully, and it is having a economic impact in the Houston area. We've talked to a lot of small business owners that they say that business is down considerably because immigrants are not showing up. They're not buying as much as they used to due to several factors, the economy, but in part due to the fact that they're trying to save as much money as they can in case they do get deported. And so I think that's it's very telling. I think it's part of the consequences that we don't talk about, and this is why we should switch the narrative and talk more about solutions rather than the issues.
Some of this has to do with perception of a risk of traveling around, or what Houston may or may not be welcoming, or whether or not there are, for example, ICE agents in a neighborhood and so forth. And certainly other cities have gotten a lot more attention for some of those specific circumstances, how immigration enforcement has been playing out there. But what are we seeing here in Houston when it comes to immigration enforcement? What can we point to and say that's clearly happening versus this is some rumor that's getting tossed around?
Well, I mean, what has happened is we have seen an increase of targeted raids, like ICE going out looking for people, and it is a lot more common. I mean, every single day we get a report of ICE gathering at a shopping center or at a storage unit or something like that. The other thing that is happening is the fact that there is police-ICE collaboration. We still continue to get reports of people being pulled over for minor traffic infractions, and the police getting called on them or them getting ICE detainers if they are sent to jail, and even for minor offenses, or even if they're found they're not indicted, they're still now in jail, and due to the Lake and Riley Act and other things that surface, they are getting ICE detainers. And so I think the fact is that these things are happening, even though we're not seeing the mass targeted raids like you see in California. There's still a very active ICE operations happening, right outside of our doorstep.
Does that lead some Houstonians who, even if they're not under any particular threat themselves of being detained or deported, just having the perception that they could be, and maybe just not traveling around much, not shopping much, not engaging with Houston as much?
Absolutely, it does, and we hear it from a lot of people. I mean, we talk to people every day. Some of them who are even afraid to go to the grocery store to get their family's needs. And these things are happening. Just last week, we had a family with 8 kids whose both parents were arrested because of an issue with a tow truck. And it turns out that neither one of the charges were dropped on both parents, yet they both got ICE detainers. And now you have 8 kids, ages 3 to 17, who are, trying to fend for themselves, figuring out what is next for them now that both parents are detained.
Cesar Espinosa is the executive director of FIEL Houston. Cesar, thank you very much for the time. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having us.
Last week, the Houston Chronicle published an editorial titled, "Trump's Immigration Raids Sow Fear in Houston. Why Are Our City Leaders Silent?" Evan Mintz is the editor of opinion and community engagement for the paper. He joins us now. Evan, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. As we continue our discussion, we also welcome you to it with questions or comments. You can call or text us at 713-440-8870. You can email us at talk@houstonmatters.org. You can also comment on our video stream on Houston Public Media's YouTube channel. All right, so last week, your editorial board's piece argued recent Supreme Court decisions and federal policies empowered more aggressive immigration enforcement, sowing distrust between immigrant communities and local law enforcement. Mayor Whitmire has been downplaying any overt cooperation between ICE and local police, but we just heard Cesar describe, at least from his perspective, he sees ICE working more closely with HPD and other law enforcement. So are we seeing that more here?
Well, that's a good question. We don't know. And we've seen this anecdotally. We have heard stories from people about police raids riling up folks who otherwise would not be engaged by this. But the reality is we don't know if ICE is working with local law enforcement in a way that we've seen in other places. And this creates a real sense of fear for families who don't know whether cops are people they can trust or not. And we had in this editorial a heartbreaking anecdote of a family, citizen children, one parent here on a visa that expired, another parent here otherwise. And there was a police raid at their apartment complex. And everybody in that complex ran inside and hid. The older daughter couldn't go to her class at college. Younger kids were kept home from school. And the older daughter had to explain to the younger siblings who were saying, oh, the police are here. That's good. The police help us. They keep us safe. And they had to say, not today, not right now. And for years, we have heard from local law enforcement leaders that they don't want the police, the sheriff's department to have to do this type of immigration work because they want everyone in the city to feel safe reporting who the real bad guys are, helping police solve crimes. And they've warned that if you start to see folks get involved in immigration enforcement, it's going to be something that leaves everybody less safe, whether you're a citizen, whether you're naturalized, whether you're undocumented. Nobody is made better off by this.
So then who do you point to and say, this is who needs to step up in this, under these circumstances here in Greater Houston?
Well, it's a tough situation. You know, I think our political leaders are put in a real corner because if they stick out their necks, they're worried that they're going to get bopped by the Trump administration. We've seen sick federal troops on cities in the Northeast, in California, LA, and we really don't want that for Houston. At the same time, we deserve to know what's actually happening in our city, and we know that the smart policy is to say that our local law enforcement should be focused on local crime and the federal enforcement should be focused on federal offenses. Now, over years, the two have worked together, particularly when targeting, dangerous criminals, handing over folks with real felony convictions, violent crimes. But what we're seeing right now is this fear that they've just cast a net over everyone, and they're not distinguishing between people who really pose a threat to public safety and folks who, maybe didn't fill out the right form, who overstayed a visa, folks who are doing everything right in life and have been here for years and have started families and have jobs and are members of their community. And we can say, well, 30 years ago, you did something wrong, and now we want to put the full force of the criminal justice system on you. This just doesn't make sense.
Is it a difference of opinion on definition of what constitutes a criminal? Because what you described, many will say, well, what they did and are doing is illegal, and therefore this is a criminal act, and so it's perfectly appropriate for federal agents to detain them and put them through the deportation process. And if found to be, the right move, then they should be deported.
And I'm sympathetic to that position. We really want law and order. We want public safety. But you can look back through the decades in Houston and hear from folks, Democrats, Republicans, from folks like James Baker and George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush, and know that they were able to distinguish between the folks who are real threats to public safety and the folks who aren't, and saying that in every other part of the criminal justice system, we know what to prioritize. People are speeding down our freeways. They might be changing lanes without a turn signal. That's an arrestable defense. But if our cops were spending every day arresting people who changed lanes without their turn signal, we'd say that's a ridiculous waste of resources. And we're going to say the same thing here. Houston knows that. Houstonians know that. And if you look back if you look at how immigration has helped our city grow, helped our city thrive, it is something that we have to stand up to this national dialogue and say, Houston knows how to do this. We've been on the front lines of all the benefits of immigration, all the downsides of immigration. And there's a reason why historically our politicians have had real nuanced views on this. Even Rick Perry, who had so many great photo ops of himself on the border, in helicopters with his wraparound sunglasses, also is the one who passed the DREAM Act to make sure that kids who are here without documentation could get in-state tuition for Texas schools, because we know that these folks are going to be the future of our state, and there's so much opportunity tied up in each individual.
Does Wednesday's shooting, where again we're told ICE officers themselves were being targeted, even though it was detainees who were shot, does that incident change your thinking at all about how we frame and debate immigration policy and enforcement?
Every shooting is a tragedy. And particularly when shootings that get tied up in politics are real threats to the way that we do politics in the United States. But at the same time, we can't conflate violence with encouraging violence, with perhaps over-the-top rhetoric, with just normal policy debates. And I remember after 9/11 how all sorts of political dialogue really got shut down. We can't let fear stop us from engaging in American political system.
Let me ask you the same question I asked Cesar. What is all of this doing to Houstonians?
I think it's making Houstonians afraid. And that's what we're hearing anecdotally. And we're hearing it from elected officials, too, who don't know what's happening in their jurisdictions, in their precincts. They're hearing just stories about raids at places where raids have never happened before, people getting round up who never really thought they were under threat from the system because they've done everything else right in life, and they're the sort of person who you want to stay here. And, I think across the country, we're seeing polling swing wildly back in the other direction. Under the Biden administration, there was a real sense that there was chaos at the border, that too many folks were coming in without checks on them, and that they wanted to see a real clampdown on immigration. Now we're seeing the chaos that was at the border move into chaos in our cities, and the American people don't like that either. From every presidency in my lifetime, we've heard a lot of rhetoric about the need for comprehensive immigration reform, basically saying we need laws that fit the reality on the ground and really give our country the tools we need to keep out folks who really shouldn't be here, to welcome in folks who should be here, and create a path to legal residency for folks who might as well be legal citizens right now.
Evan Mintz is the editor of opinion and community engagement for the Houston Chronicle. Evan, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.